Imagine this. It's around 1000 BC. You're just out here, living your best ancient life. You've got a fire going. There's some questionable meat on a stick. The stars are out, which is honestly pretty nice since there's zero light pollution. And then you see it. A light in the sky, but it's not a star. Stars don't move, stars don't have tails. Stars don't look like they're on fire and heading directly toward your face. No, this is something else entirely. And if you don't know what a comet is, if nobody you've ever met has ever explained ice and rock and orbital trajectories, then you are staring at the most terrifying thing you have ever seen in your life. Okay, so before we judge our ancestors too harshly, and we will judge them, but gently, let's actually think about what they were experiencing. You are a person living in, let's say, 500 BC. Your entire understanding of the sky has been built up over your lifetime through observation and stories passed down from your grandparents. You know the stars, you know the moon, you know the planets, even if you call them wandering stars and think they're gods, which, honestly, fair. But you have never in your life seen anything like this. A comet isn't subtle. When a bright one appears, it can be visible for weeks, months sometimes. It's bright enough to see during the day. The tail can stretch across a quarter of the sky. And it doesn't belong. It doesn't follow the rules. The stars have their lanes. The sun and moon have their schedules. But this thing just appeared. And in a world where the sky is your calendar, your compass, your religion, and your daily existential anchor, a rule breaker showing up in the heavens is a Category 5 event. Now here's the thing about ancient humans. They were not idiots. They were just working with the information available to them and making perfectly logical conclusions from that information. The problem was that the information was terrifyingly incomplete. And when information is incomplete, humans do what humans do best. They make up stories. So let's take a tour of human civilization's most spectacular reactions to comets. And I promise you, every single one of these stories is real. We start in Babylon, roughly 700 to 600 BC, and the Babylonians, credit where it's due, were serious astronomers. They tracked the stars obsessively. They built elaborate observatories. They made incredibly accurate predictions about eclipses. But even with all that knowledge, when a comet appeared, their job wasn't to explain it scientifically. Their job was to interpret it, because in Babylonian thinking, the sky was basically God's message board. Everything up there meant something down here. Babylonian court astrologers would spend days observing a comet, its color, its direction, the shape of its tail, and then produce a report for the king explaining exactly which disaster was coming and who it was coming for. Sometimes it was good news. Mostly it was not. And here's the wild part. Sometimes they were right, or at least something bad happened, and they could point to their prediction and say, "See, we told you." Never mind all the times they were wrong. No one wrote those down. This is the basic problem with omen reading. You're pattern matching against a world that constantly produces disasters anyway. Plagues, famines, wars, kings dying. These happen all the time. If you predict them after seeing a comet, you'll have a good hit rate just by baseline probability. But no one in Babylon was doing statistics. They were trying not to die. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Eurasian continent, the Chinese were doing something remarkably similar, but with added bureaucratic precision. China kept the most detailed astronomical records in the ancient world. For over 2,000 years, Chinese court astronomers observed, cataloged, and interpreted every celestial event. And comets got their own category, Baoxing, broom stars. The name tells you everything. A broom sweeps things away. And in the Chinese imperial court, things being swept away meant one very specific thing, the current dynasty. Because here's how Chinese political theory worked. The emperor ruled by the mandate of heaven, divine permission from the cosmos to be in charge. If the cosmos was unhappy, as demonstrated by floods, famines, earthquakes, or suspicious lights in the sky, it might be time to sweep out the old dynasty and bring in a new one. This made comets politically explosive. An emperor who saw a comet either had to act fast, perform rituals, make sacrifices, issue pardons, lower taxes, show he was taking the heavenly critique seriously, or risk his own generals deciding the mandate had transferred elsewhere. And this wasn't just paranoia. There are documented cases of dynasties using comet appearances as propaganda for their own legitimacy. The comet appeared just before our founders' victory, clearly heaven approved. The Mawangdui silk manuscript, discovered in a Han dynasty tomb and dating to about 300 BC, contains something extraordinary, a catalog of 29 different types of comets, each with a different shape, each with a specific disaster it predicted: long tail, war, round head, flood, fanned tail, plague, twisted form, civil unrest. 29 flavors of catastrophe, in comet form. This is genuinely remarkable scholarship, even if the conclusions were entirely wrong. Now we come to my personal favorite chapter in the history of comet terror, Rome, specifically the year 44 BC. Julius Caesar has just been assassinated, 23 stab wounds. The Senate is in chaos. Rome is about to descend into a civil war that will fundamentally transform the Mediterranean world. And into this moment of maximum political instability, a comet appears in the sky. It hung in the sky for 7 days. Romans called it the Cetus Iulium, the Julian star. And Caesar's adopted son and heir, Octavian, who would become Augustus, made the most breathtakingly clever political move in ancient history. He declared it was Caesar's soul ascending to heaven. Think about that for a second. Not "this is a terrible omen," not "the gods are angry," but "that is my father. He's a god now, which makes me the son of a god, which means my claim to power is literally written in the stars." He put the comet on coins. He built temples. He referenced it in speeches. The comet became the single most effective piece of political propaganda in Roman history, and it was completely free because the universe provided it. The lesson of Augustus is not about astronomy. It's about narrative control. Whatever appears in the sky doesn't come with its own meaning. Meaning is assigned, and whoever assigns it first wins. The year is 1066. England. King Harold sits on his throne, freshly crowned, deeply nervous, aware that half of Europe thinks he doesn't deserve the job. And then Halley's Comet appears. Now, we know it was Halley's Comet because astronomers have traced its orbital path backward through centuries. In 1066, it was particularly bright. It hung in the sky for weeks. Harold's court panicked. Their advisors said it was a bad omen. For Harold specifically, the comet meant a king would fall. Across the channel, William of Normandy looked at the same comet and told his troops it was a sign of their coming victory, that God had sent a fire in the heavens to announce that Harold's time was up and William's was beginning. Same comet, completely opposite interpretations, based entirely on what each leader needed it to mean. Harold lost at the Battle of Hastings in October 1066. He died with an arrow in his eye, or through his eye, or near his eye. The tapestry is ambiguous. And William took England. Did the comet cause this? Obviously not. Did it shape the psychological state of both sides going into the battle? Almost certainly yes. Morale matters. And nothing destroys morale like your court astrologers telling you the sky itself is against you. The Bayeux Tapestry includes the comet. Harold sits on his throne looking miserable, while beneath him a crowd of panicked people point upward. The Latin text reads, Isti mirant stellum. These men wonder at the star. That panel, that image, that moment of collective human terror in textile form, that is history. The Vikings already had a framework for cosmic catastrophe that made comets fit in perfectly. They were living in a universe that was scheduled to end, spectacularly, violently, with gods fighting giants and the world tree burning, and they called it Ragnarok. In that context, a comet streaking across the sky wasn't just a bad omen. It was a potential opening act. The Aztecs had a concept called Xucoatl, the fire serpent, a divine being of fire and celestial power, associated with the sun and with the bringer of cosmic transformation. When the Aztecs saw a bright comet with a blazing tail, some of them saw the fire serpent, a divine entity moving through the heavens, bringing change. And across North America, oral traditions from dozens of indigenous nations have preserved memories of spectacular comet appearances, recorded not as astronomical events but as stories. stories of great change, of migrations, of wars, of floods. The comet as a story marker. Something happened here, something important, something the next generation needed to know about. Jump forward to 1664, a large comet appeared over Europe, and then, right on schedule, the Great Plague of London began. 100,000 people died in London alone, and for the survivors trying to make sense of it, the comet was right there, the obvious answer. Now, we know today that the plague was caused by Yersinia pestis, a bacterium carried by fleas on rats. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the comet. But in 1664, nobody knew about bacteria. Germ theory was still 2 centuries away. What they did have was a comet in the sky and 100,000 fresh graves. When you're surrounded by death and desperately searching for an explanation, and the only thing that happened before it all went wrong was a fire in the heavens, you draw the line, you make the connection. It's human. It's wrong, but it's human. Roman Emperor Nero, not history's most emotionally stable individual, had a similar problem. When a comet appeared during his reign, his advisors brought him the traditional interpretation. A great ruler would die. Nero's response was creative. He executed several prominent Roman nobles. His logic: if the comet needed a death, he would provide deaths. Influential people who weren't him. Problem solved. 1811, the largest and brightest comet of the 19th century blazed in the skies over Europe for months. It was so bright it could be seen in daylight. Napoleon saw it and interpreted it as a sign of his coming triumph. He was planning to invade Russia, and the comet was surely heaven's endorsement. He invaded Russia in June 1812. By December, he had lost approximately 500,000 men to Russian resistance, Russian strategy, and most devastatingly, the Russian winter. The Grande Armée retreated in catastrophic disarray. The comet had nothing to say about this. All right, let's talk about what a comet actually is, because once you know, the terror makes perfect sense, and also becomes slightly embarrassing. A comet is a small body in the solar system, typically 1 to 10 miles across, made primarily of ice, rock, and organic compounds. Scientists sometimes call them dirty snowballs, though muddy space iceberg is arguably more accurate. Most comets come from one of 2 places. Short-period comets come from the Kuiper belt, a disk of icy objects beyond Neptune. Long-period comets, the ones that show up unexpectedly after thousands of years, come from the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is extraordinary. It's a vast, spherical shell of icy debris surrounding the solar system, extending from roughly 2,000 to 100,000 astronomical units from the Sun. That's a long way. That's 20 times further than Pluto. The nearest star is only 4 times further than the outer edge of the Oort cloud. Occasionally, through gravitational nudges from passing stars, the galactic tide, or giant planet interactions, an object from the Oort cloud gets knocked loose. It begins falling inward, toward the Sun, and after potentially millions of years in darkness, it enters the inner solar system. Hello, ancient humans. I'm a refugee from the dawn of the solar system. I've been traveling for 10,000 years. Don't be alarmed. As the comet approaches the Sun, the heat vaporizes its surface ices, releasing gases and dust. This creates the coma, a fuzzy atmosphere around the nucleus. And then, as solar wind pushes that material outward, the characteristic tail, actually 2 tails, a bluish ion tail that always points directly away from the Sun, and a yellowish dust tail that curves slightly along the comet's orbital path. The tails can be millions of miles long, and they are entirely made of stuff that used to be part of the comet. Here's the part that should genuinely blow your mind. Comets carry organic molecules, amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, the first ingredients of life as we know it. The hypothesis of panspermia, still debated but taken seriously by serious scientists, suggests that comets may have seeded Earth with the organic compounds that eventually, after billions of years of chemistry, led to life. Every human being who ever stared up at a comet in terror may have been looking at something that helped create them. That's either beautiful or horrifying depending on your perspective, and honestly, either reaction is reasonable. So why, really, were ancient humans so terrified of comets? The simple answer is they didn't know what they were. But the interesting answer is more complex. Human brains evolved to find patterns. This is one of our most powerful and most dangerous features. Pattern recognition is what lets us notice that shadow moves like a predator, or that plant smells like the ones that made the tribe sick. It's survival software. But pattern recognition has no built-in spam filter. It fires for real threats, and it fires for false ones. It fires when you see a face in a cloud. It fires when you hear footsteps in an empty house. And it fires, with particular intensity, when you see something unprecedented in the sky. The technical term is apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. Combined with confirmation bias, our tendency to remember the hits and forget the misses, you have a recipe for an omen system that feels completely valid. Here's how it worked in practice. A comet appears. Everyone notes it with dread. Over the following months, any disaster that occurs gets mentally linked to that comet. If nothing bad happens, no one writes it down. But if a king dies, a war starts. A flood occurs. That goes in the record. Comet predicted it. Repeat over centuries, and you build a mythology that seems statistically solid, but is entirely an artifact of selective memory. Ancient humans weren't stupid. They were running the most sophisticated biological prediction engine that had ever existed on Earth. They just had incomplete data. And you know what? Given the information available, their conclusions were not unreasonable. Today, comets are a source of wonder rather than terror. We track them years in advance. We name them after their discoverers. We send spacecraft to meet them. Halley's Comet returns every 75 to 76 years. Your grandparents or parents saw it in 1986. If you're watching this right now, there's a reasonable chance you'll see it in 2061. It will be magnificent. In 2014, the European Space Agency's Rosetta mission achieved something our ancestors would have found incomprehensible. They launched a spacecraft in 2004. It spent 10 years traveling through the solar system, caught up with a comet called 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, and landed a probe on it. We landed a robot on a comet, on an object that was throwing off gas jets, rotating unpredictably, with gravity so weak that a standing jump would send you into orbit. We landed on it. But there's one last story to tell, and it's uncomfortable. In 1997, a comet called Hale-Bopp appeared in the skies. It was one of the brightest comets of the 20th century, visible to the naked eye for a record 18 months. And a group of 39 people called Heaven's Gate concluded that a spacecraft was hiding in the comet's wake, waiting to carry true believers to another level of existence. All 39 died in a mass suicide in Rancho Santa Fe, California. We mock ancient humans for their comet terror, but in 1997, in suburban California, with NASA on television and the internet in full operation, 39 people died because a comet appeared in the sky. The fear is older than history. It's in us. It doesn't disappear just because we know better. But knowing is still better. Understanding is still better. Looking up at the sky and seeing a 4-billion-year-old piece of the original solar system, a frozen messenger from before Earth had oceans, a dirty snowball that might have helped start the chain reaction that eventually became you. That is a story worth telling. And it's a lot more interesting than the one about the king who executed 7 senators to appease a fiery light in the sky. If you enjoyed this descent into ancient astronomical panic, subscribe to Animated History, where we explore all the ways the past was absolutely bonkers. Next time, eclipses, the day the sun died, and the civilizations that absolutely lost their minds about it. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, and maybe, just once, go outside and